think it's easy.
Okay, well, it's used to teaching.
Until I fall, I can stand. I don't know what you know, and I don't know what you expect. So I'll just make 2 points. If you expect a story about gas chambers and all the other horror stories, I'm not the guy to tell you. I never saw anybody being gassed. I've never seen it, any of the latest 20th century cases where people were eliminated. So my story is completely different because I come from a very small town in Europe, and I was not touched the same way as most of the European Jews. Just as horrible. Even in some places, it's even more horrible. I come from a town what is now Ukraine. It used to be Poland, but the borders here were moved around between Germany and Russia, and some countries just were eliminated. But the Jews stayed when they stayed for 1,000 years. So I come from
Here. Here, this circle.
Oh. You can read the circle. This is a little town. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard the word small town where Jews live. What is it called? Shtetl. So you all know what the shtetl means. It's Yiddish for a small town. That's it. And I come from that shtetl called Rokitno, even though I wasn't born there. I was really born in another town here called Rokitno.
No, Kovel.
Sorry. The reason I was born in Kovel instead of Rokitno is because my grandparents lived in Kovel. And my grandmother was also my mother's aunt, and she wanted to give birth with her first child in a place with people that she knew. So we went by train from Kovel.
She went by train.
She went by train. I didn't go by train. We moved from there overnight to Rokitno, where we had a business. A small grocery store that sold all the goodies for kids, like candies, lollipops, everything else under the sun. So I was really raised from birth to the age of 7 in Rokitno. I don't know any other town, but I remember Rokitno very well. Even though I'm now 82 years old, where all the nice things happened to Jews and not so nice things, I was just that kid, 6, 7, 8, until everything hit us like a storm, which we didn't expect. So that's where I'm going to start. So I was born in Kovel over there, and this is only less than a night's trip by train to Kovel, from Kovel to Rokitno. Very small town, 8,000 people, 3 of whom, more or less, were Jews.
3,000.
Not 3,000. You meant 3,000.
Of course. I'm more nervous than you.
This is sit down, you'll be more comfortable.
And my early years were probably, you could compare to your years until you were 8 years old, let's say. After that, you and I, even though there's a difference in age, obviously, we didn't enjoy lives. I didn't enjoy the same life as you did. Even though I don't know most of you at all. I mean, I did see your faces off and on, but I don't really know you. And for certain, that I'm certain, you couldn't possibly know my life. It's like day and night, or worse. So, growing up until the age of 7, really, was beautiful. I had my own store, my own candy store. I was an only child. Everything I wanted, I got. How many here are only children? You know, do you still enjoy your memory?
Still
Everything? Oh. I know the feeling, but as much as I personally enjoyed being an only child, to be an only child had drawbacks. The first drawback is when it rained, you were given from heaven a time to feel sorry for yourself. Because who are you going to play with? There's nobody at home besides the parents who are running a store. They can't come back and play with you. So when it rained, there are no one to play with, because all the other kids have gone to their own home. And I'm sure most parents were not too crazy having another few kids there. So I was stuck feeling sorry for myself. And this brought terrible feelings of belonging. One thing is my parents reminded me was, I once asked my father, when will God give me a brother or a sister? And his answer was very simple. He was a simple man, religious. He said, well, if you pray, God will probably give you a sister or a brother. I took this literally. I knew how my father prayed. He didn't go to shul every day. Almost every day he prayed in the kitchen. The kitchen table had a drawer. His talis and film was there, and I would watch him. You know, putting on film. But I didn't really understand what it was doing. But it was a way to God. And one day, I said, I must have a brother or sister. So I climbed on the kitchen chair, took out the talis and film, and started. Most of them are, you're all over 13, so you know the routine. You go through, and I took a look that my arm was too short for the serious underarm. So, well, I said, okay. I climbed on the kitchen table. It wasn't the same as my father. My father was much taller and everything fit. everything was hanging, and the talit was touching the floor, and I knew that's abnormal. You can't put your talit on the floor. So I stopped wiggling with the talis and film, and I got myself fitted with talis and film. Guess what it looked like? It was everything 2-3 times, the rest was hanging, then the shalrosh was somewhere here, and then down the nose. And my mother walked in, and she started crying.
Vinny, how old were you?
And I was 7.
No, you were younger.
No, that was 7.
7.
I was 7, and she started crying, called my father in from the store, and he laughed it off. He said, "Oh, it's okay, at least he's doing something. Eventually, it will come out right." This is my entrance in meeting God. I don't think he understood what I said, but I didn't give up. We were under the government, under the Polish government. This was Poland, an independent country. The essence of the whole thing was that you did what you saw the older generation do, even if you didn't understand what it is. You went through the rigmarole of putting on this film, and most parents were very proud of it, that their children are doing God's ways. 1939 was a war that they probably never heard of. It was a war between Poland and Russia and Germany. Out of the clear blue sky. Nobody understood the war, not in the little shtetl. People were not too familiar with what was going on. Poland lost. It was erased from the map. The map of Poland was divided in 2. Half went to Russia, and the other half went to Germany. By agreement of these 2 countries, there was no war. They were just marched in, cut it in half, that was it. We were on the Polish side, and Poland here, rather Rokitno, was the closest town to the Russian border when it was Poland. But now there was no Poland, so Russia came into our part of Poland. The other half went to Germany. But everything was peaceful. There was no such a thing as taking it out on the Jews. You know, you kept quiet and kept your head low. You lived. Within a month, the Russians that had taken over the Russian part put in their own rules, their own laws. And one of the laws was, you can do anything you like, we're not going to bother you. But the following languages are illegal. One of them, the first one was Hebrew. Kovel, remember I mentioned 8,000 people living there. Jews, 3,000 Jews, had their own school. School was excellent. All languages were taught in Hebrew.
No, all subjects.
All the Hebrew, and my mother was a graduate of the school, she could speak fluent Hebrew at any time you wanted. And she learned it in this one school, and so did all the other kids. The very religious kids were sent away to yeshivas. Those were not as successful as the Tarbut school. And of course my parents were always dreaming that I will, when I grow up, go to the Tarbut school, which was right in the middle of town, easy to find, and any kid living in this little town could walk to school. And most of them did. At the age of 5, 6, 7, they started with kindergarten, it continued, and by the time you reached 7 or 8, you had a very good knowledge of Hebrew, although we couldn't speak Hebrew fluently. But I tell you, my mother, was saved during the Holocaust, I'll tell you later. And when she came to visit Israel in 1972, she got off the plane. There were 2 or 3 people arranging the staircase. In those days they used the staircase to go down. And she was talking fluent Hebrew. And they were surprised, how can this woman coming from Europe speak fluent Hebrew? So I just give you an idea of what the kind of education that went through the kids. Now, after 1939 comes another date, which I think all of you who take history will come across, and that's 1941. A real war broke out. Who are the 2 countries that are at war now? Who is it possible could be at war? Anybody want to take a guess?
Yeah, somebody there.
The US?
No,
Germany
not in
and
Europe.
Russia. Germany and Russia?
That's right. There you go.
US is not come into war.
I can take it straight,
And
guys.
Russia was the Russian war between Germany and Russia was bloody from the start. At first, Germany was winning. And it was winning with destroying thousands and thousands of people and property, and slowly Russia was being pushed out. Remember that half of the Polish land? There was no Russia. Because Germany won this part of the war. They went through hell. And the only thing left was at the end of the first intermission was Germany. There was no Russia. Russia was put back all the way, practically, to Moscow. Stalin, who was a big honcho of the Soviet Union, had a nervous breakdown. And in that nervous breakdown, no one could locate Stalin during that 6-week period where all the Germans were practically at the door of Russia. It was only at that time, 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, that some very bright generals, Russian generals, superb generals, figured out a way teaching the Germans a lesson they should never forget. And that is, get the Germans to fight not just a war, to fight a very strong. How many would live in a warm area or a cold area in Canada, let's say? Who lives, let's say, around Montreal? Nobody? Nobody here from Montreal? Oh, you're
They're
missing.
mostly from the US.
Anyway,
Go to your own store.
Mostly.
so the Russian generals made by tactics, made the Germans fight the war. Except the Germans thought they had already won the war. And they used to come out with a fancy uniforms, march in Paris and other cities, to show the world that they're in charge. Except this only worked until the first frost. And you can't walk in uniform with a thin uniform when it gets down to 30 below. And then the Germans realized their first real defeat. Their soldiers were dying, freezing, on the streets. All the machines that they brought, the tanks, everything, all the machines
You
were
should
frozen.
switch to your own store.
Yes,
That's what they were like.
And everything froze. You couldn't use it. You couldn't put a shell into a tank because it wouldn't explode. And this is where, when the Germans started to be more vicious, especially against the Jews. And we lived in that little town called Rokitno, and we got all kinds of laws, new laws. One of the laws is every Jew has to move. Where would everyone move? This is a little town.
Mostly they have to move from other
You
parts
see
to
these-
here. This
This
was the ghetto.
thing, this is Jews were allowed to live. Now the rest were ghetto parts. Together, these things were the ghetto. And the ghetto was very simple. All Jews lived there. You function there. You die, too bad. Nobody was there shooting anybody, but your movements were controlled. You couldn't get out of there. You couldn't go out shopping. You couldn't go to buy things. And you couldn't deal with the people who are not Jewish. Up to there was 1,000 years of living quite peacefully with all the Goyim. Now the Goyim realized if they're terrible with the Jews, they gain points with the rest. Here are some of the laws that came out almost immediately. All the people in those squares were called to a meeting to be held in the center of this little town. The center of this little town was always the
Market.
marketplace. And the marketplace, for centuries, was run twice a week. Why twice a week? Why is it twice a week?
Save the days.
Anybody go to shul?
Mondays and Thursdays.
It's Monday and
Somebody
Thursday.
somebody did say.
So they called a meeting of all the Jews to meet in the center of Rakitno to be counted. Counted for what? Nobody knew, and nobody was afraid to ask. It was called the meeting with the threat of a family being wiped out in front of everybody at the marketplace if one of their members ran away. It was very simple. So actually three times went through the charade. You met, the wife went one way, the husband went the other way, the boys underage went with the father, and the girls underage went with the mother. Didn't go anywhere, they just went to one side, to another side. And then they said, stood there for 5-6 hours in broiling heat, till they counted everybody, and it counted equal to the number that the Germans had secretly acquired before. The first time it was done, everybody did exactly as the Germans asked. But after about 5-6 hours of the charade, they said, okay, you can go home. A month or two later, they did the same thing. The second count. The same thing that happened the first time was done with the second one. People got gathered, sweated a lot, and nothing became of it. After 5-6 hours, they said, okay, you can go home. Very few people even dreamt that this is some kind of a trick. They figured, well, the Germans like, order. So they see numbers and they see stamps, that you put on paper. They're satisfied. 2 or 3 months later, same thing. Only this time, people got smart. This is not a game. The Germans must be thinking of something. And then we heard stories that in different places, the Germans pulled the same trick and they started shooting at Jews and killed Jews. Or taking the Jews by force into trains and moving the trains from small towns to big towns, who gathered all other Jews, and now instead of having 2,000-3,000 Jews, they would have 50,000-20,000 Jews in one place. And the Jews were scared, of course. By the time it reached the third one, got a little smarter. We imagined that we heard all kinds of stories, and we have to start using our brain and not fill out all the wishes of the Jews. I was with my mother on the lady's side, because I was 7 years old. I'm underage, that's my place.
Did you want to stay where your father was?
Hmm?
You wanted to stay where your father was?
My father was not there. When the Russians were taking over the town, they took my father into the Russian army. It's not a wish to join the Russian army. You were forced. You have to do it or you will be arrested. So he was in the Russian army, being moved around with a big, I explained to you, with the women, and the women don't go to the army, they stay there. And of course, the women without husbands and they didn't have enough food, you had to do the best you could. And the best you could was finding food. My mother was a very bright woman. She could deal in a business manner with any man or any woman and come out the winner. She knew how to talk to people, they respected her, and she didn't have the store anymore because it went from the Poles to the Russians and then to the Germans. So we had to beg for food, if you could. At the third gathering in the marketplace, I was holding my mother's hand, and they were counting and counting and counting. It was sickening and very hot. A woman, we had it in our town, and since it was a small town, everybody knew everybody else. We had a very tall woman, taller than any man in the town. She was in the back of the women, and because she was so tall, by our terms, maybe 6 feet tall, the woman screamed out in Yiddish, "Yidden, run, they're going to shoot us." Because she saw the Ukrainian and the German soldiers in the background trying to take positions, the best way to shoot. What she really saw, there were 6 Russian soldiers and about maybe 40 Ukrainian soldiers. But the Germans didn't trust the Ukrainian soldiers, so they never gave them enough bullets to use. Each soldier would get 5, 6 bullets, and that's it. Do your job. But all the other Jews turned around and saw that not only do you have this 46 soldiers, there is a row of train cars arranged on the track, waiting. And as that woman screamed, they started to attack. So we were immediately deafened by bullets and the noise, and of course all the children started crying, and you can imagine what was going on. And then, like magic, all the good Jews started running. Not in any direction, because nobody knew what the direction should be. The direction you took is the closest you saw of trees. And because it's a small town, the whole town was really surrounded by forests. And the people who could run, who were not shot immediately, because most people think that once you fire a gun, you can kill somebody right away. It's not true. A lot of people come out from a shooting hurt, but they can run, they can look out for themselves. Everybody started running in all directions. And of course, the Germans don't understand that. If you give an order, you carry it out. You don't start running in all directions. My mother, holding 7-year-old kid by the hand very hard, does not let the hand disappear, and pulling her little child, me, until we couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't breathe anymore because she was so strong. And guess how tall she was? Over 5 feet.
Not even,
Not even.
4'10".
But she was determined to get her child out. And the first thing we aimed for was a forest. The forest was all around. So we managed, with quite a few hundred other people, to reach various points of the forest. And then we realized if we keep traveling in big groups, it's easy for the Germans to catch us. And men, especially the older men who were not in the army, kept asking, begging everybody, please divide. Just make the groups smaller. So the old man, made groups with men. The women had no choice, made groups with the children's friends. And then we realized in the middle of the night, we've been running all this time, that there are no men in the women's side. The men were stronger, and they looked out for themselves. Looking out for themselves and their children was number one. Nothing else counted. So when you saw your relative escaping ahead of you and maybe getting hurt, you don't stop to help. You don't just stop to help because a certain thing would happen is you'd get shot easier. Do you understand the picture? This is the beginning of hell. There is no food. It's in the closing days of September. And in Ukraine, September 1st is told by either strong rains, snow, and finally frost. When frost hits, every human being dreads it because you can bear not having food, but you can't bear frost because your body, I'm sure you understand what frost is. When your body tenses up, you can't think. And here are the men who disappeared, even though they were old men, and the women with children of all ages, especially the ones with kids until the age of 10, I think, were allowed to stay with their mothers. And now we say hello to winter. And winter means you have no hope, nothing. So little groups of Jews formed, women with children, and older boys and girls that were not with their parents anymore. We formed groups. And the only way you could get any food, when I say any food, a potato is food. That's it. Some going, who were all the farmers around, were very gracious. They were told not to help Jews, not to give them food whatsoever. But some some had good hearts. So instead of giving food to the Jews, they would turn away. And to the Jews, it was a sign. If the boy is turning away, they're not begging Jews, he wants them to rob him. So it wasn't so simple, but it was true. Many were helped the Jews that way, especially women and children. They didn't have the heart. And just to give you one example, after roaming the woods for about 4 days without food, dragging a little monster like me, and not being able to see that somebody wants to help you, but is afraid. So one person who knew my parents, because he used to come to our store to buy things, invited my mother in with me, which was a miracle. We were in there, invited to sit at a table in a very warm peasant house, because the flames were already working. And the woman came with a plate of soup that I had never seen before. The soup, the first thing I thought of is it had fish eyes floating. I'd never seen fish eyes in a plate. And so I wasn't going to eat. Even though at 7 I knew certain food you don't touch. So my mother was holding my arm, eat. First thought I can't eat it. Look at it. It's hazard. She said, eat. You have to stay alive. At all costs, you eat that plate. Don't leave anything. So I ate, and they were very nice. They let us out and blessed us because they were a certain form of Christianity called the believers.
Like Baptists, sort of like Baptists.
Something like Baptists, very nice people. But they were afraid to help openly, so they did secretly what they weren't supposed to do. So 2 weeks later, we were hungry again, of course, couldn't have food, and my mother told me, at all costs, we're going to this peasant. If he sells us out to the Germans, it's God's will. But I can't stand it my child to be so hungry. I walked on the door, they opened the door, blessed us again, and gave us chairs near the same table, and they were giving us food. But we heard that their daughter-in-law that was there with our first coming is not around. So my mother started a conversation with this peasant, and she asked, where is the daughter? And their answer was very simple. God gives and God takes. Later on, we realized somebody had told the Germans that they helped a Jew, so they came and took revenge by killing their daughter-in-law. So this is to give you a taste of what life is really like. Without gas chambers, without any of the other goodies.
story. It's one more story.
Now, one more, and I'll let you off. This went on and on, actually, years. Now, the winter is gone. It's spring again. Life looks beautiful. And you're hot. You're hot. 3 drunk Ukrainian soldiers who are controlled by the Germans. There's 3 of them. And we, people that they got together with 2 women, 4 children, 2 grown men, well in their old age. And I think there was another woman I couldn't decide whether she was married or not married. It was just a woman. And we're going to play a game. The game is very simple. Every woman that has a child, the woman is asked to kneel. The child has to kneel in front of the mother. The child's back of the head has to be near the mother's mouth, like this. Anybody want to take it?
Hannah, you want to show it?
Yeah.
Okay, come. So I'm going to
And
sit.
go
You have
on
to
first.
sit your chair. Bring your chair as if we're meeting, because I can't leave. You'll be my child. Okay. So this way, sort of.
Here.
This,
No.
well,
Here. Put your
okay.
mouth
There. Okay.
up. Okay. And this Ukrainian soldier was drunk, who only had about 3 bullets because the Germans didn't give him any more. Would go to behind the mother with 1 bullet, kill 2 people. If you pull the trigger here, the bullet goes right through here, to here. Does it hurt? And that, those were the executions. The first group were the 2 men. There was a father and a grown man. I was 7, so I couldn't judge the younger man's age. That was the son of this older man. The guy pulled the trigger. There wasn't a peep. They just fell down sideways, and they were dead. That's it. Now the next one was a woman with a daughter. Wanted told the daughter to kneel, and the daughter with the back of the head, pulled the trigger, and what I, as a little kid, couldn't understand. Doesn't it hurt when you get killed? How come you don't really make the peep? I expected for people to fall and it's not anything but it was nothing. So I figured out it doesn't really hurt when it shoots you. Because look, it just fell down and everything is fine. And they're dead. My mother was asked us to kneel. Took me like this poor child. Close to my mother. And I hear,
Rummaging.
I hear the rifle being loaded. And that you hear very clearly when it's very quiet. My mother tensed up, and I could hear her. She is in the back of me, so I can't really see, but I say, I wish my mother would stop finagling. what are those soldiers going to do? Take us out for a dance? That's what they have some plans. And as he loaded the rifle, my mother pulled something I could not see, but I could feel what my mother was doing. You know, there's loud, so you put the hand, and I can feel on my back her hand. And she takes something out and throws it on the ground. The idiot that was about to shoot us was a peasant who was ignorant. He didn't know what she threw. So, what do? You take the rifle, you put it down for a minute against a tree, and you go and find what she threw. But he didn't start shooting at us. And he lifts a string of pearls. And the peasants in Ukraine had never seen a string of pearls. But he figures that it must be valuable. Stands there like this. The rifle is over there. He's looking at these pearls. He is quite drunk. So he's asking the next idiot, what is it? So he gets advice in Ukrainian that it must be Pacherki. Pacherki means what? Jewelry. It must be something in jewelry, but I don't know the name of it. Oh, he's looking. And then I feel in my back my mother's fist. She gives me a real bang. She never did that before. Take my hand, run. And as we started running, we were in the forest before we knew it, because the forest was all around us. And this saved us of the pearls. As a matter of fact, we have
Not here, but
Not
I do
here.
have a picture
a picture of my mother
with those pearls.
with those pearls, because those were the pearls my father gave her when they were engaged.
There's one.
No, it's okay. Well, this is how we were saved. By chance, not by anything else. And I think we'll stop here. And if you have questions,
Should they ask questions now? Let's give them a few moments to ask questions, and then I'll do mine. It's not so long. So. Okay, sit down.
no,
I don't know. My story is one that I know, but I don't remember because I was very young. I was an infant. And life, my parents were very well off. They had a wonderful business. My father ran, my mother worked in the business in 1939. Didn't happen too often. My mother had maids. Life was terrific. But things started happening in 1941. Again, it's very similar. So between 39 and 41 wasn't so bad. But then the Germans came into Romania, and in Romania they were welcomed with open arms. There was what we call the Iron Guard, that was the militia of the Romanians. Germans come in, do what you want. Outside of Bucharest is a big city, but outside of Bucharest there was, in the provinces, there were a lot of people being taken, a lot of Jews who were taken to camps, who were killed, very similar to what was happening there. And my father was a pretty smart man. He had come from one of the provinces originally, from a place called Bessarabia. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And actually my mother did too. But they met in Bucharest, got married there, and I was born there. And he saw things were happening. Jews were being attacked. Some men were being forced to clean the snow. This is a big city, very sophisticated city. They used to call it the Little Paris. You know, people lived very well there. And my father decided it's time to move up. So he got tickets on the Struma. Has anyone heard of the boat called the Struma? What do you know about it?
I just haven't heard of
You
it.
just heard, okay. This was a boat that left Romania in 1942, and my father had tickets on it, but for some reason he decided that it wasn't safe because there was only room for a certain number of people and they had sold too many tickets. So he changed his mind and he took his money back, and that boat was sunk off the Turkish coast, and one person remained alive. So I wouldn't be here to tell you the story had I been in that boat. My father was a very, as I said, very enterprising, very smart man, and he decided to buy a boat. So they bought this little fishing boat, and there were 36 people. He gathered his friends, so with my mother, my father, my maternal grandmother, and our maternal granddaughter always lived with us. And off we went. We had fictitious visas. We had visa, in order to get out of Romania, you needed some kind of a visa to get out. So somehow they got false visas to, I think, Uruguay. I'm not quite sure, I don't remember anymore. And of course, had anyone been intelligent enough, they would have realized a small fishing boat is never going to make it to Uruguay. But we left. We left from a small port called Tulcha. We had apparently a captain who liked to dress as a captain, but knew nothing about running a boat. And now, I don't know if you know, but from Romania, to go from Romania to, maybe you can put the map, because that would be useful. To go from Romania to what is now Israel, no, the other one, the small map.
Oh.
No, my map.
Oh, good.
Yeah, mine. It's really a 4 or 5 day trip. Took us, yeah. So this is, we start. That's perfect. Started up there, and it's down all around the Turkish coast. Lots of difficulties. Sometimes we run out of fuel. Sometimes we run out of water. It took 40 days. Number 40 somehow means a lot in my life as well as in biblical terms. And I was a baby, as I said, so I have no memory, but someone wrote a diary. And I don't know if originally was it written in Hebrew, but I received it in Hebrew and I've translated it into English, so anybody I know can read it. And there'd be life on the boat. Captain was no good, so a few of the guys that were engineers, they took over and they were running the boat. In a few places we were able to get more fuel, a few places water. And then we came to one of the Greek islands, and the Turkish Navy had taken over that island. So here we see these, they're aiming their guns at us, a tiny little boat, but to them we looked like a submarine, Russian submarine. And my father, in his great wisdom, decided to just take a chance. So he took his baby in one arm and a white sheet in the other arm, and he waved both of us. And they put their guns down. And they allowed us off the boat. They took us into their building where they were. And apparently the captain in charge fell in love with me, so my mother says. My mother was able to speak to him because my mother spoke beautiful French, even in those days. And somehow they communicated. I reminded him of one of his kids. They gave us water, fresh water. You know how important it is when you're on a boat to have fresh water. And apparently he gave me chocolate, so that must have been good. And on we went, and on we went. When we got to, I don't know how, there are miracles in this world. You heard one, God made a miracle. And we came to it was called Palestine in those days. It wasn't Israel yet. We came to Palestinian waters. Of course, the British Navy got us this tiny little boat. And they took us into Atlit. Have you been to Atlit? No. I don't know if you make it, but Atlit is a small, it's now a museum, but it was a small army barracks camp, right just south of Haifa. They put us in this detention camp. We weren't allowed to leave. It wasn't a concentration camp, I can't say that. But the men and the women were separated again. So, but I was okay. I was a little kid. I didn't know the difference. I was with my mother and my favorite grandmother, my only grandmother that I knew. And they kept us for 100 days. So at the end of 100 days, we were allowed to just move into the community. I guess, I don't know, I know you studied about illegal immigration and the certificate system where you have to have enough certificates. They must have gathered enough certificates to allow us to go into the regular community in Tel Aviv. And that's where I grew up, so I didn't forget your question. I taught for many years. So we lived in Tel Aviv from September 42 till 1954, and then I moved to Montreal. My father had two brothers in Canada, and my mother had a sister in Canada, and we moved. My mother could not handle the climate, and he had moved there a few years before. I was too young to be of interest in, but eventually we met at a party, introduced by friends.
And I bought it.
Yeah, and 54 years later, we're still together, and that's one of our products. Oh yes, oh okay, he's prompting me because he knows all my stories. So in 1948, as you know, when you've been to the, I know you were in Tel Aviv where the state was declared, right? So it was very exciting, but before that, in November, when the UN passed the resolution for the partition, we lived in a small little apartment in a rental. Not the fancy life my mother had before. She was working, she had a business, but she worked. And in the middle of the night, our neighbor comes, knocks on the door, and he said it in Hebrew, he'll say it in Hebrew, and I'll repeat it, I'll translate it in English. Adam Tulchinsky, yesh lanu medina. Mr. Tulchinsky, my father, we have a state. This is when partition was passed. It was euphoria. We were excited. I was a little kid, maybe grade 1. And we were dancing in the streets. So every time you see those films of people dancing in the streets, I say, that's not me, because I probably wasn't allowed to stay up that late. It was very exciting times. In 1948, when the day the state was declared, that was a Friday afternoon, because of Shabbat, you couldn't do it May 15th, you had to do it May 14th. And I know exactly where I was that day. We were visiting friends of my parents, and by a sheer fluke, this is where I spent the first 2 weeks of our visit here on that street. It's some street in Tel Aviv. And I remember we stayed so late because we were so excited and everything was closed. We had to walk all the way home, and that was, there were no cars. We didn't have cars, we didn't have phones, we didn't have a radio, we didn't have anything. But we were safe. So, I don't know if anybody has more questions. Any other questions? We sort of kept you. Mine is a happier one. Mine is a miracle, but it's a happier story because we didn't really suffer deprivation. As I said, my father was someone who saw things and knew what to do. In Athlete, if you ever get to Athlete, I'm going to tell you, there's a website. Actually, you don't have to get to Athlete. You can look it up on their website. Do you have that?
Is this the website? Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, this is their website. And so it's the name of the boat is Mircha. There were 40 people, actually. It's wrong. It's 36 people in for a crew. And it says we left from Tulcha. It's Hebrew English, but that's okay. And somewhere, I don't know if it's on this page or another page, it says the organizer's name.
Yeah, if you go up on that side.
Yeah, on that. Can you go up on that? No, the other one. Yeah, here. Organized by Tolchinsky Isaac. It's misspelled, but that's okay. So it's real. When you have...
Good picture.
Yeah. So that's... But if you are interested in these things, it's well worth it. And if you don't have questions, that's fine. If you want questions in private, that's fine.
again, at the same time, I've heard these stories. There's two stories. It's survival, and it's 48, and these two, exactly what we've been learning. As Yom HaShoah, Yom HaTzvot coming about, it's really, really wonderful. If you have any other questions, please feel free to dial about the day and for organizing this. We really appreciate it. And it should be meaningful Yom HaShoah coming up, and Yom HaTzvot, Yom HaZikaron as well. And
Yeah.
Mamash Tova, Nesiyat Tova, Gam Chazara.
Yeah.
And come back together.
As you can see, I grew up in Israel.
Thank you.
That's
Let's see if anyone has